I'm going to show you how I assemble one of these Atlavox S4 Meshtastic solar nodes. I've actually been really hesitant to do this video because over the past couple of weeks, I have been nonstop. So I announced this thing less than 2 weeks ago, and I am literally about to run out of inventory. So there's a good chance that while you're watching this video, these are completely out of stock. So I almost didn't want to do this video because I can barely keep up as it is. But I figured I learned a lot over these past couple of weeks with putting all of these together and sending them out. So I still think there's value in showing you the whole process on how I put these together, things that I've learned. I also had 2 instances where a customer reached out with a problem. So I want to talk about that and how I resolved that. People have been asking me about international sales, the ability to just buy an enclosure without the fully assembled Wizz Block. And I want to tell you kind of where my head's at as far as what's going to happen next once these are out of stock for this first batch. All right, so let me show you how I build one of these, and we can kind of talk about that stuff along the way. So this is what the product looks like when I ship it out. I do a bunch of assembly and testing before I get to this point. This is how I receive the product from my manufacturer. So I know I've mentioned this before, but this is actually a solar power bank product meant for like security cameras or trail cameras and stuff like that. So that has saved me thousands of dollars from having to do a completely custom injection mold. There's some shortcomings with that, which I'll mention as we go along here. So the first thing I do is I take everything out of the box, set it aside. We don't need the original manual for the solar power bank. I actually have custom manuals that I got printed for the Atlavox S4. But I empty everything out and I stamp the box with the Atlavox logo. I love this part. I've always had kind of a fascination with graphic design and branding, product packaging in particular, because it's a blend of mechanical design. You know, it's a functional box. It has to mechanically, structurally provide a purpose, but it also is an artistic expression of the brand and the product. And it's a tactile medium as well. People are going to be touching it and handling it. There are so many facets with product packaging design that you don't typically see in other types of design. So I've got this 3D printed stamp and laser etched stamp that I made. I go ahead and stamp the box. I love how this looks. I love the grungy texture. It was a surprise to me. I wasn't like trying to achieve this grungy texture, but it's just the way it came out is beautiful. I love it. So I stamped that, I set this aside, and now I unfold the solar panel. So I give it a quick inspection. I want to make sure every single panel that goes out is, you know, not damaged and looks good. Now, one smart thing I thought of was when I had the manufacturer send these to me, I said, don't install the screws. I'm missing my screwdriver. I said, don't install the screws. So they only put 2 screws in each one. That way I don't have to, it just saves me a little bit of time. I don't have to unscrew 8 screws every single time. I'm just undoing these 2, and then I'll put the other ones in at the end. So we take the lid off, set that aside. Now I actually came up with a like 32-step process that I was using for probably the first 20 or so that I put together. Now it's like just so ingrained in my memory, and I have several kind of cross checks that I do along the way to make sure I didn't miss anything. That's the most critical thing, is like the quality control of making sure you didn't forget a step is something that I have at the top of my mind every single time I put one of these together. So one of the priorities with once this is opened is to get the mount installed as soon as possible, because there's a bonding time. I've got these little 3D printed Wizz Block mounts that I made. So here's what the inside of the solar panel looks like. So originally, these 2 locations right here would hold 2 additional batteries. So I had them shorten these terminals so to only accept 4 batteries, and that leaves room here for the Wizz Block. So I printed an ABS Wizz Block mount that sits right in here perfectly And I went with ABS just because that's what the solar panel is made out of, and it's just going to withstand higher temperatures, so it's not going to like deform or anything like that. Now, originally I was using super glue, which I know sounds sketchy, but this is actually the professionally recommended method for bonding ABS plastic. Now, I was having some issues with this brand. I ended up switching to kind of a more professional brand, super glue. That was working a lot better, but there's a reason why I switched over to a 3M VHB mounting tape. So that's what I'm using now. I'll explain that in a little bit. But one of the benefits of using the VHB tape is it allows me to bond at a lot quicker pace. So I don't have to leave it in the clamp for as long of a time as I did with super glue. Even though super glue is pretty quick to bond, I was having some issues where, depending on how big of the drop I was putting, sometimes it would bond. It would take a lot longer to bond, so that was kind of throwing me off a little bit. With this, it's just a lot more reliable, and there's another benefit which I'll get to in a second. So I just take a clamp and I set that to make sure we have a nice bond between everything, and I set that aside as we move on to the next step, which is drilling the holes. So we need a USB connector and an antenna connector. And so I designed this 3D printed jig. It has some bronze bushings in it. There's some pins in here to make sure it locks in properly. Now, originally I was thinking I would set up a jig on a drill press or something like that. But the problem is these are all individually packed as I get them. So for me to like open every single one and like take all the lids and then go to my shop and use the drill press, this is actually a lot better. So I just drill these by hand. I use a Forstner bit for the larger hole. It cuts a lot cleaner compared to other types of drill bits for the larger hole. With the bushing, it's more than enough as far as keeping it vertical. But the other thing to think about too is the plastic is relatively thin, in the sense that if I'm off a few degrees here or there, it really doesn't make much of a difference. There's plenty of tolerance between the USB connector and the antenna connector where it doesn't matter. So I usually pull out a trash can under the desk here and just hold this and drill these out. Now, one thing I notice is you can't go too fast. There's like kind of a perfect speed because you don't want to produce too much heat where the plastic starts to melt. And once I do the first hole, I pull the Forstner bit out, and then I use just a regular kind of steel drill bit for the antenna hole. This one, because the hole is a lot smaller, it works really well for this hole here. That one's really quick. So once the holes are drilled, I do an inspection, make sure everything is out of the way. I will always find a couple of little tabs on the antenna hole just because of the design of the kind of traditional drill bit. So I do need to take a utility knife and just kind of trim those little wings out of the way. The reason that's important is that's the surface that makes the waterproof seal. It's the inside that makes the waterproof seal. So that needs to be a clean surface in order to make sure that doesn't leak. So this is all set. We can set this aside. And now this has been sitting for a while now, and it makes a really nice bond. You know, I've tried to lift these up. The VHB tape, it stands for very high bond, and they use this in automotive and kind of permanent exterior sign mounting and things like that. So it's a really good solution for mounting this. All right, next thing is the Bluetooth antenna. We take the little label off. We don't need that. Pull the tape backing off, and that goes right in this pocket in the mount. And then I've got a little clip that just holds the wire out of the way for when we put the Wizz Block in. Now the Wizz Blocks, kind of interesting. This is how they send Wizz Blocks to you when you buy in bulk. They're just on like a big tray. And then I grab a USB cable. Now this is where one of my customers had an issue. He received the node, he tried plugging it into his computer, and the computer would not detect it. And I realized that some of these cables that I ordered were faulty. Now, there was also one time where I had tried to plug a cable in and it didn't detect. And so I have since gone and individually inspected every single one of these to make sure they're good. These are all the defective ones I filtered out. I'm going to be getting a replacement. The manufacturer said that straight up, they were like, we skipped the quality control part of our process. So they never got inspected before being shipped to me, apparently. And that's why they were having problems. But the other thing that I'm not too thrilled about, so this clips in pretty tight here. These are actually meant to be almost kind of like a permanent installation. So if you do ever open this up and try to remove this, it's very hard. It has a very aggressive grip, which is good when, you know, it's not something that's typically going to be accessible. But one thing I'm not too thrilled about is the bend that I have to put on that cable when you put the Wizz Block in. And that is one of the other reasons why I switched to the VHB tape, because that customer that had a problem, I almost wonder if it was the bend in that cable that was causing him issues. I sent a new cable. Everything's been fine since then. But these are the things that I've done to try to remedy that problem. All right, next we've got the screws. So I'm going to mount the Wizz Block, and I usually throw this screw for the mounting arm in this bag while I have that bag open. So I install the Wizz Block to the mount. Then I need to connect the Wizz Block to my charge controller that's integrated with this solar panel. So I have a custom power cable here. This clips into the Wizz Block right here, and I 3D printed these little tiny clips to retain the power cable in this channel back here so it doesn't interfere with any batteries that get installed in the panel. And then this plugs in right here, and the power cable just loops around and sits right there. Next, we grab a waterproof antenna, plug that into the IPEX connector, wiggle to make sure it's connected properly. We'll grab the Bluetooth antenna, clip that in as well. I do like to tuck this in just so if you do end up adding more batteries, it's not going to interfere with this last battery slot here. Now, one thing I need to be really careful of is this little grommet right here. So that goes right on the bottom of the panel where the original kind of output cable would run. So really easy to get lost when you have this open. One of the drawbacks of, again, kind of using a retrofit product. So we're almost ready to put the lid on. We just need to grab a couple of batteries. Really need to make sure these are inserted the correct way. So the negative is up on the top. So we'll put 1, 2. Each one of these is 3,000 milliamp hours, so 6,000 total. And you have 2 more slots if you want to add another couple of batteries. Next, I have this little USB installation tool. It helps keep everything aligned so the port is aligned properly, and also just gives me something to grab when I'm tightening everything. There's an O-ring that's really important that goes on first. Again, it's waterproof from the inside surface. So we pop that on, put that through the lid, and then you slide the USB cap over the threads and grab a nut and tighten it down. So I tighten this by hand. I don't use any tools because I don't want to scratch the surface. Now you'll notice as I tighten down, the kind of lid does not stay in place. And I have tried so hard to get that to stay, but at the end of the day, once you start tightening it, the most important thing is to make sure there's some compression on the O-ring. And so that's kind of what I prioritize. I want to see some nice squeeze on the O-ring, and the plastic lid might not be fully aligned, but that's just not as important as it being waterproof. So then I pop the tool off. Now this brings me to the second problem that a different customer had. He turned on the radio and it wasn't being detected anywhere. And so he opened it up and saw that the IPEX connector was disconnected from the Wizz Block. And if that happens, the radio just burns out if there's no antenna connected. So he was able to replace the Wizz Block. Thankfully, I offered to replace it. We'll give him a whole new unit, but he said, no, I want to see if I can figure this out. He had a Wizz Block on hand. He replaced it. Everything worked. And so I sent him a replacement Wizz Block just so he wasn't down one of his Wizz Blocks. But it got me thinking, what could I do to prevent that from happening in the future? So one thing I do now is I take a little bit of tape. So this is 1/2-inch gaff tape, really good quality adhesive that doesn't leave residue. So it's designed for kind of video production where they're using this to kind of attach different things and they want to be able to pull it off without leaving residue. And so I just put this right on top of the antenna where the IPEX connector connects to the radio, and it just helps prevent any sort of situation where that can be kind of popped off with vibration or anything during shipping. And at this point, I'm doing another sweep of everything. I've got both of my antennas connected, my Bluetooth antenna, my SMA antenna. The Wizz Block is screwed in, all 4 screws. The power cable's connected. I have 3 retaining clips. It's connected over here. I've got the 2 batteries in here. I'm also inspecting the gasket to make sure that it's not twisted and it's all seated properly. There's no damage. And I want to make sure that tape is not interfering with anything. And I also double check to make sure the USB gasket is in place as well. And the last step is to take the grommet, put it in place, and pop the antenna through the hole. I make sure that the cable kind of twists naturally, however it wants to twist. That way there's no torsion on the connector. Then I put a washer and a nut. I finger tighten this for now. And by the way, I located this hole to where the inside hex of the waterproof antenna is interfacing with the inside top of this lid. And so that prevents the antenna from spinning as you tighten the nut down. You can get this really tight, which we do as kind of the final step. But for now, I go finger tight just because it does kind of overlap the lower lip. So I don't want to try to tighten it all the way right now. And for now, I just put 2 screws in the lid to hold it in place. Then I'll grab an antenna, so you get one antenna with the S4. I also sell these individually. They're awesome antennas, 915 megahertz for United States. And so you can get those on atlavox.com as well. I'll link them below. So I screw this on because we're gonna go power this up, test it, make sure it's good. We're gonna flash the latest firmware, set some configurations, and make sure this thing is ready to go out of the box when it arrives at your door. All right, so I transition over to the computer. I take a USB cable and plug it into the radio. I should see these light up right here. If I don't see those light up, then I know there's a problem with the USB cable. So now I'm going to interface with the device through Python in order to quickly flash the latest firmware and set some configurations. So the first thing to do is initiate the DFU mode. You do see an error here. It's actually fine. What this is doing is mounting the Wizz Block as a drive. So we can see it pop up right here. And what that allows me to do is copy this firmware that I have saved on my computer, and I can paste it over here. It's going to prompt me, make sure I want to do it without the properties, which is fine again. This is going to transfer the firmware to the device. It's going to restart automatically. Then it throws this error every time. It's not a big deal. It's almost like the drive disconnects like right before it thinks it's done, but it's actually fine. It works. So I just click skip right there. It's all set. I go back to my command prompt, and then I send this command that will configure the latest firmware with a couple of kind of power saving settings that I've set up to make sure that it kind of performs optimally as a solar node. This is going to be set up as client. You can always change that. You can learn all about, customizing your Meshtastic installation online, and you can fully customize the node yourself once you receive it. Now, the last thing I do is, because I have an antenna installed, that way we don't burn out the radio, I'm actually picking up my kind of local Meshtastic radios on the device. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is necessary, because I don't know if that gets saved to the device itself or to whatever like computer or phone is kind of connected to it, but I just do this anyways. You guys can let me know in the comments if this is redundant or not necessary, but this is just a reset of the kind of nodes that are picked up by the radio. So I do that, and as soon as I get my command prompt, I unplug it and kind of cross my fingers that that cleared the node cache. That way when you plug it in, you don't see, you know, my nodes at my house. All right, so now we're going to turn back around, finish labeling and packaging the S4. All right, to finish up, we add the rest of the screws. So there's 8 screws total. Now, of course, I thought about using a drill to speed this up, but the problem is some of these holes haven't had screws in them yet. So they take more torque to kind of get installed. And with a drill, it's a little bit harder, especially with these small screws. I wish these screws were bigger. You know, I wish the mounting holes were larger and the screws were bigger. But you just kind of have to do this by hand in order to make sure you don't strip out the screws. So that's what I do. I do this by hand. All right, so the screws are tightened down. We can remove the antenna. We can finish tightening the SMA connector. So that's nice and tight. We'll put the cap on the USB port. And one of my favorite parts is this. Check this out. I 3D printed. Someone designed this. Watch this. There's the label. So I love this step. It just kind of like makes it official and kind of, you know, adds the branding, adds the product name and all the details. Just really makes it look official. So now there's actually another label that I add. I kind of just ran out, so I got to print out a few more. All right, look, as I'm recording this video, I got another sale. So this thing's gonna sell out. I've only got like 20 of these left. So I still got to tell you kind of what my plans are moving forward. All right, so I started adding these labels to the S4 because it just got me thinking. So that one customer that had an issue with the cable being disconnected actually had me thinking, well, wait a minute. I know I have it in the manual to make sure you plug in your antenna before you turn it on, but a lot of people aren't going to read that. They're going to want to just open it up and get it started. So now I add this little warning label. I stick it to the side like this, and then just attach a little bit of the edge like that. So it's easily, oh, is the battery dead? I'll have to charge that. So I put it like that so it's easily removable. But now this S4 is totally complete, ready for being packaged. I grab a soft micro cloth and just make sure there's no fingerprints or anything, and just kind of give it a once over again. Make sure everything looks good. I'm not missing any screws. Everything looks great. So now I grab the packaging, which this is a whole other project in and of itself. I laser cut every one of these. I have a custom stamp for this as well with the Meshtastic M-powered logo there, my logo, and the S4. Obviously, this isn't ideal. I should outsource this. It's just so expensive to have custom-made product packaging. So I do this, but it takes a ton of time as well. So I think moving forward, I'm going to come up with something else. But for now, this has been kind of fun to play around with. Again, I kind of have like this respect for product packaging. So anyways, I put a mounting arm in here. There's a little slot to keep it in place. I grab a manual, pop that underneath. You got your screws for the mounting arm, your Wizz Block screws if you want to add any modules or anything, and then the screw for the mounting arm that tucks in there. And then you get a USB cable as well. So that all gets tucked in. This folds over. And grab the box and the S4. This slips right into that slot. That goes right like that. And then we take the other side. This gets folded just like this. The solar panel slips in like that. Pop in your antenna. And we're done. That is a full assembly of an S4 node. All right, so what's next for the Atlavox S4? I'm going to run out of stock really soon, probably by the end of the week. These are going to be gone, and it's going to be out of stock for a while. So I just did 100 of these to start out with, just to see kind of how it went. And now I was kind of blown away at how much people were excited to buy one of these. And I want to make some improvements. I want to make it easier to assemble. One of the biggest things is people wanted to buy this either in Europe or Canada and other places. I didn't open it up internationally because first, I only had a small amount, but I also was hesitant to inventory a bunch of Wizz blocks for the different frequencies and stuff like that. So I think I'd be much more open to offering just the enclosure where you could add your own Wizz block internationally. I also had to kind of figure out all of the different rules and regulations with selling internationally. So I kind of just held off for this first batch. So for the next batch, I've been talking to the manufacturer, and we're going to be making a number of improvements to this device. So one of the things I really don't like is how you have things connected to the lid. So I want to try to eliminate that, where the antennas and the USB connector are all part of the base panel, and the lid can just be removed and set aside, and you're not going to worry about kind of tugging cables and stuff like that. We're also going to improve the waterproofing design around it, so it's not as critical to make sure the gasket is perfect. And we're going to think about a different kind of mounting solution as well, because I'm just not a fan of this mounting arm. So I think what's going to happen is once I sell out of these, it's going to be out of stock, but I will set up an email list to notify you when, you know, we're getting ready to kind of basically when I would say when I place the order and I know that the order is going to be shipped to me, I'll probably open up pre-orders. And then with this second batch, I'll make a much larger order, maybe 500 instead of 100, and kind of see where we go from there. This is a learning process for me. It's been a long time since I've done a physical product business. I typically do like digital online marketing type stuff. So I don't want to grow to be like a boss with employees and like have a brick and mortar. So I'm like trying to figure out a way to do this where I can still do it myself. Maybe the assembly is a lot faster and easier, where I can scale this to a certain degree without being completely overwhelmed. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So if you're watching this in the future, sign up for the email list. I'll have a link below, and you'll be notified when the kind of second version or iteration of the S4 is launched. Now, in the meantime, I'm going to be launching a new handheld solution very soon, like this week. I'll have these on atlavox.com. Now, the thing that's really cool about this will be offered as a case, like just an enclosure as well. And it has an integrated power switch up top here. So you can buy just the enclosure and install your own battery in your own Wizz block, and you'll have instant power switch without having to solder anything. So you just plug your battery into the circuit board here, and then there's a power cable that would plug into your Wizz block. So I'm going to talk a lot more about this very soon once I have some ready for sale. Obviously, there's going to be a lid on here. I just kind of wanted to show you the insides. But one thing that's really cool about this radio is it has an identification method. So you can, if you have multiple radios, you'll know which one is which. You can change these. These are just like little cubes, and you can change them around and have a physical identifier on your radio. All right, guys, so that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.